They thought she was just another black woman in the courtroom, until a cop slapped her in front of everyone. But seconds later, the room froze, because she wasn't a spectator at all. She was the new judge. And what she did next changed everything. The courtroom buzzed with tension as spectators shuffled into their seats, waiting for the morning hearings to begin. The sound of murmurs, shuffling papers, and the occasional cough filled the air. Among the crowd sat Angela Coleman, a well-dressed black woman with an air of quiet confidence. She wasn't here as a defendant or a witness. She had come to observe the proceedings, her eyes sharp and steady, taking in every detail. Two officers stood near the front, whispering and smirking at each other as they noticed Angela. One of them, Officer Blake, leaned closer to his partner. "What's she doing here, dressed like that? Thinks she owns the place." His tone dripped with disdain. His partner, Officer Harris, chuckled and shook his head. When Angela rose to move closer to the front row, Officer Blake abruptly blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he barked, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "I'm taking a seat," Angela replied firmly, her voice calm but steady. The officer sneered. "Not here, you're not." Without warning, he shoved her back. When she steadied herself and looked him in the eye, his temper flared. In a shocking display, Officer Blake slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the room, silencing everyone. Gasps filled the air. Angela's cheek burned, but her expression didn't falter. She didn't cry out, didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and fixed the officer with a piercing gaze. "Are you finished?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. The judge had not yet entered, and the entire courtroom was stunned. No one could have guessed that within minutes, the very woman they had seen struck in humiliation would rise to claim the judge's seat. The courtroom was frozen in disbelief. People leaned forward in their seats, whispering to each other, trying to process what had just happened. Some covered their mouths, while others shook their heads in disgust. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the shocking moment that Officer Blake had laid his hand on Angela Coleman. Angela stood tall, her cheek red, but her composure unshaken. The power in her presence unsettled the officers more than her silence. Officer Harris shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the eyes drilling into them from every corner of the room. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself further," Angela said coldly, her tone cutting through the heavy silence. Blake smirked, trying to reassert control. "You don't give orders here, lady. This is a courtroom." Before Angela could respond, the heavy wooden doors creaked open. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Matthews." The room shot to its feet, and Judge Matthews entered, adjusting his robe as he climbed to his seat. He scanned the room, immediately sensing the tension. His eyes landed on Angela, and then on the officers, noticing Blake's smug grin and Harris's nervous fidgeting. Angela didn't move. She locked eyes with the judge, her expression calm but unreadable. "Is there a problem here?" Judge Matthews asked sharply. For a split second, no one dared to answer. The silence was suffocating. Then, a voice from the gallery broke through. "That officer slapped her!" The judge's brow furrowed, his gaze hardening. Blake's grin faltered. Harris looked down at his boots. Angela remained still, her hands clasped in front of her. She knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom had just witnessed the first spark of something much larger, something that was about to turn the entire system upside down. Judge Matthews adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. The whispers still buzzed through the courtroom like angry bees, but he silenced them with a single pound of his gavel. "Order!" he thundered. The room fell quiet, but the tension remained thick. Angela Coleman stood poised, refusing to be reduced to a victim. Her cheek still bore the mark of Officer Blake's slap, but her calm presence made her look stronger, not weaker. She met the judge's gaze without hesitation. "Miss Coleman," Judge Matthews began carefully, "I was told you were struck. Is this true?" Angela's voice was steady. "You saw the crowd's reaction, Judge. You can see the phone cameras raised in every direction. There is no denying what happened here," Blake interrupted, his tone dripping with arrogance. "She's exaggerating. She got in my way, and I kept order. That's my job." "Your job?" Angela snapped, her voice finally rising. "Your job is to enforce the law, not abuse it. There's a difference, Officer Blake, and it seems you've forgotten it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the spectators. Judge Matthews raised his hand for silence again, his face tight with conflict. He knew he couldn't ignore what had just taken place in front of dozens of witnesses. But confronting his own officers, men sworn to uphold the law, was a heavy decision. Angela stepped closer to the front. If a citizen had slapped me, they'd be in handcuffs already. What makes an officer above that same law? Judge Matthews leaned back, stroking his chin. The question hung in the air like a sword. Blake shifted nervously, realizing for the first time that his badge might not shield him this time. And Angela knew this was only the first crack in their wall of authority. The silence in the courtroom was almost unbearable. All eyes were fixed on Angela Coleman, who stood unwavering, her posture commanding despite the sting on her cheek. Officer Blake fidgeted, his earlier bravado slipping away as murmurs grew louder among the crowd. Judge Matthews cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "This courtroom will not descend into chaos. Officer Blake, step forward." The officer smirked, as if expecting the judge to side with him. But before Blake could speak, Angela raised her hand. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe this matter deserves more than a simple reprimand." Her voice carried authority, surprising even the judge. Matthews studied her carefully. There was something different about Angela, something that made her presence impossible to dismiss. "And who exactly are you, Miss Coleman?" he asked, his tone cautious. Angela paused, letting the silence work in her favor. Then she spoke clearly, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "I am not just a citizen here to observe. I am Angela Coleman, appointed as the new presiding judge of this very court." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, and disbelief thundered through the gallery. Even the bailiff's jaw dropped. Officer Harris took a step back, while Blake's smugness drained instantly, leaving only shock on his face. Judge Matthews blinked, stunned. You're the replacement?" Angela nodded firmly. "Effective this week. I had planned to introduce myself formally at the afternoon session, but it seems fate chose a different moment." The weight of her words sank into the room. Phones recorded every second, ensuring the world would soon see the truth. A black woman, disrespected and assaulted by officers who had no idea they had just struck their new superior. And Angela Coleman wasn't about to let them forget it. The revelation hit the courtroom like an earthquake. Conversations broke out in every corner. Some voices hushed in disbelief, others raised in outrage. The bailiff struggled to quiet the crowd, but no one could take their eyes off Angela Coleman. Officer Blake's face flushed red, his arrogance melting into panic. This is some kind of joke," he stammered. "She can't be a judge, not her—" Angela turned to him slowly, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You should have thought about who I was before you raised your hand against me. Now, Officer Blake, you'll face the same law you swore to uphold." Judge Matthews, still visibly shaken, leaned forward. "If what Ms. Coleman says is true, then she has authority here. I'll need confirmation from the Chief Justice's office, but—" He trailed off, already realizing the weight of her words. Angela reached into her bag and pulled out an official letter sealed with the state crest. She handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to Matthews. As the judge read, his expression hardened. When he looked up, there was no more doubt. "It's true," he announced firmly. "Angela Coleman has been appointed to preside over this court." The room gasped again. Harris swallowed hard, while Blake's knees seemed to weaken under him. Angela stepped closer, her presence dominating the space. "This court belongs to justice, not arrogance, not abuse. What happened today will not be forgotten. And it will not go unpunished." The cameras captured every moment, every word. Within hours, the news would spread beyond the courtroom walls. But for Angela, this was more than headlines. It was the beginning of a battle for respect, accountability, and change, and the officers who had underestimated her were about to learn exactly who they had struck. The energy inside the courtroom was electric, fear, shock, and awe all tangled together. Reporters scrambled out the doors to be the first to break the story. Phones buzzed as clips of the incident went viral within minutes. Officer Harris tugged at his collar, looking increasingly uneasy. Unlike Blake, he had stayed mostly silent, but guilt was written all over his face. Angela Coleman turned her gaze on him, her sharp eyes cutting through his nervous stance. "You stood by and did nothing," she said firmly. "That silence makes you complicit." Harris lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. The spectators murmured, some nodding in agreement, others whispering about how rare it was to see officers held accountable in public. Judge Matthews tapped his gavel again. "Enough. We are not here to create a spectacle." But even as he spoke, he knew the spectacle had already been created, and Angela was now at its center. Angela stepped forward, her voice clear. "Spectacle or not, the truth matters. I may have been appointed as judge, but today I was treated like less than a citizen in this very courtroom. That cannot be ignored." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. Blake clenched his fists, glaring at her. "You think you can ruin my career over a slap?" he spat. Angela's lips curled into the faintest smile. "No, Officer Blake, you ruined your own career the moment you put your hands on me." The courtroom erupted once again. Blake's face darkened, but there was nothing he could say. For the first time, the badge on his chest felt more like a burden than protection. Angela knew this was only the start. The real test would be what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. The buzz of conversation refused to die down. Even Judge Matthews struggled to keep the room under control. "Order!" he barked, pounding the gavel repeatedly. But the weight of what had just been revealed was too heavy for silence. Angela Coleman stood steady, watching the chaos with cool eyes. Finally, she raised her hand. "Enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The room fell silent. Even Matthews, still technically presiding, leaned back and allowed her words to command the moment. Angela turned toward the gallery. "What you all witnessed today was not just an insult to me, but to the dignity of this court. An officer of the law struck a citizen in plain view and expected to be shielded by his badge. That ends now." Blake scoffed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You don't scare me. People like you don't belong on that bench." Gasps spread through the crowd. Angela's eyes narrowed, but she kept her composure. "People like me?" she asked softly. "Do you mean women, or do you mean black women?" Blake's face reddened, but he didn't answer. The silence was damning. Angela continued, her voice stronger. "Then let me make this clear. I belong here because I earned it. I belong here because justice demands it. And I belong here because no one, no matter the uniform they wear, can strip me of my rights." Harris finally spoke, his tone low. "Judge Coleman, I regret not stopping him." Angela studied him for a moment before replying, "Regret is a start, but accountability is what matters." The spectators nodded, some even applauding softly. It was clear Angela Coleman had not only claimed her seat, she was beginning to reshape the very meaning of justice inside those walls. By now, the courtroom felt less like a legal proceeding and more like history unfolding. Every phone camera was locked on Angela Coleman, capturing her words, her composure, and her defiance. Officer Blake shifted uneasily, realizing that the more he spoke, the deeper he sank. Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Given this development, I find myself in a difficult position. Judge Coleman, would you like to assume your rightful seat now?" The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to Angela. She inhaled slowly, her gaze sweeping over Blake, Harris, and the restless spectators. Then she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's time this court had a lesson in justice." Matthews rose, his expression conflicted but respectful. He moved aside as Angela ascended the steps to the bench. The moment she sat down, the entire energy of the room shifted. The woman who had been slapped only minutes ago now commanded the highest seat in the courtroom. Blake's voice cracked. "This is a setup. You can't do this." Angela's gavel struck the sound block with a sharp crack. "Sit down, Officer Blake. This is no longer your stage." The crowd erupted with applause and cheers, though the bailiff quickly tried to quiet them. Blake fell back into his chair, his confidence completely shattered. Harris sat rigid, sweat dripping down his temples. Angela adjusted her robe, which Matthews had passed to her as a symbolic gesture. Then she looked directly at the two officers. "From this seat, I don't see uniforms, I see actions, and yours will be judged accordingly." Her words echoed like thunder, making it clear the tables had truly turned. Angela Coleman leaned forward in the judge's seat, her hands folded on the bench. The weight of the gavel felt heavy but natural in her hand, as though it had always belonged there. The room was utterly still, waiting to see what she would do next. "Officer Blake," Angela began, her voice steady, "you assaulted me in full view of this courtroom. You abused your authority, believing your badge gave you the right to humiliate and harm. Today, that illusion ends." Blake clenched his jaw. "This is ridiculous. I was keeping order." Angela's gaze hardened. "Order? There was no threat, only your prejudice. You didn't act to protect this court, you acted to assert power over me, and the law does not excuse that." The crowd murmured, nodding in agreement. Harris shifted in his seat, clearly dreading what was coming. Angela continued, "Officer Harris, though you did not strike me, you stood by and allowed misconduct to occur. The law calls that complicity." Harris raised his head slightly, his voice trembling. I regret not stopping him, Judge Coleman. Regret is not accountability," she replied firmly. "You had the power to intervene and chose silence. That silence spoke volumes." Angela lifted the gavel. "Therefore, both of you will be placed under formal investigation effective immediately. Bailiff, escort them out of this courtroom." Gasps and cheers erupted as the bailiff stepped forward. Blake sprang up, outraged. "You can't do this to me." Angela's gavel slammed down again. "Justice doesn't ask for your permission, Officer Blake. It demands your obedience." The bailiff took Blake by the arm, while Harris followed quietly, his head bowed. The spectators clapped softly, some even standing in respect. Angela had made her first ruling, and the courtroom would never be the same. The moment Officers Blake and Harris were escorted out, the courtroom erupted into chaos again. Reporters dashed to the exits, their phones already buzzing as headlines spread like wildfire. "New Judge Coleman orders investigation after being struck in court." Angela Coleman remained seated, composed and resolute. She had expected backlash, but she also knew the power of visibility. Every word she spoke had been recorded, every action broadcast beyond the courthouse walls. Judge Matthews, now standing at the side, gave her a subtle nod of respect. "You've made waves, Judge Coleman. The world is watching." Angela met his gaze. "Then let them see that justice does not flinch in the face of power." Meanwhile, in the corridors outside, Blake was fuming as reporters swarmed him. "This is political," he shouted. "She's playing the race card. None of this is real justice." His words were caught on camera, but instead of winning sympathy, they sparked outrage across social media. Comments flooded in, "He hit a judge and still talks like this." Accountability has finally arrived. Harris stayed quiet, avoiding cameras, but his silence was also noted. Back inside the courtroom, Angela addressed the remaining spectators. "This court will continue its work, but today serves as a reminder to officers, to citizens, and even to judges that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." Applause filled the chamber, though Angela quickly raised her gavel to restore order. "Court is adjourned," she declared. As the people filed out, Angela sat still for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle. This was not just about one slap or one officer. It was about a system, and she knew her real fight had only just begun. By the next morning, Angela Coleman's name was on every news channel. Clips of the slap, her reveal as the new judge, and her first ruling played on repeat. Some hailed her as a symbol of justice finally standing firm. Others, especially within law enforcement circles, were less forgiving. At the police precinct, officers huddled around screens, watching the footage. Many were stunned, but a few grumbled under their breath. Blake, now temporarily suspended, paced furiously in a side office, ranting about being set up. Harris sat quietly, his guilt eating at him. Meanwhile, Angela arrived at the courthouse, flanked by reporters. Microphones crowded her, voices overlapping. "Judge Coleman, do you fear retaliation? Do you believe Officer Blake should be permanently removed? Are you prepared for the backlash from law enforcement unions?" Angela paused, her calm presence silencing the crowd. "Justice is not convenient, it is not comfortable, it is necessary. If accountability creates backlash, then so be it. This court belongs to the people, not to those who abuse power." The clip went viral within hours. Supporters flooded social media with messages of encouragement, while critics accused her of undermining police authority. Inside her chambers, Angela sat with Judge Matthews, who offered a weary smile. "You've stirred a hornet's nest," he admitted, "but maybe it's exactly what this system needs." Angela nodded. "This fight isn't about me. It's about making sure no one in that courtroom, officer, lawyer, or judge, ever believes they can act without consequence." Outside, crowds began gathering, some holding signs of support, justice for all, no one above the law. Others protested angrily, demanding she step down. The battle lines were being drawn, and Angela knew the next move would define her legacy. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters, protesters, and an army of reporters. The atmosphere was tense but electric, as though the entire city had gathered to witness what would happen next. Angela Coleman stepped outside, her robe flowing in the breeze, her chin lifted high. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting in anger. Microphones were thrust toward her face, but Angela raised her hand for silence. "I stand before you not just as a judge," she began, her voice firm and steady, "but as a citizen who has endured the very injustice this court is meant to correct. Yesterday, I was struck in this courtroom. Today, I sit on its highest bench. That is not irony, that is accountability." The crowd quieted, hanging on every word. Angela continued, "To those who say I am too bold, I say justice has waited too long. To those who fear change, I say the law is not here to comfort the powerful, it is here to protect the people. And to every officer, every lawyer, and every judge who wears authority like a weapon, know this, the days of impunity are over." The cheers this time were deafening. Even some who had come to protest lowered their signs, caught off guard by the power of her conviction. Inside, Blake sat watching the speech on television, his career in ruins. Harris filed his formal resignation, unable to bear the guilt. Angela took a deep breath, looking over the sea of faces before her. She knew this was only the beginning. But for the first time in years, the community believed the courtroom could belong to them again. Justice had a new face, firm, unflinching, and unafraid. And her name was Judge Angela Coleman.